Hi, Grandma and Grandpa. Um, you're doing well. It is Wednesday night, March 13th. Um, I got back a little while ago from my humanitarian field course, which is really interesting, but it's very practical, and the purpose of it is to teach us what to do in a humanitarian crisis, which is great, but it means that we spend the whole class learning about like the really horrible things that can happen in displaced person camps. So tonight the lecture was all about the difference between measles and meningitis and cholera and dysentery, and it was all pictures, and it was very, very striking and disturbing, but also very gross. So I was so the class this class is through the Harvard School of Public Health. So a lot of the people who are in it are like have medical training. And the girl I was sitting next to, after the first hour, I turned to her and said, "This is reaffirming my decision not to be a doctor." And she said, "Well, I am a doctor." I was like, "Well, I'm glad you don't get squeamish then, because that was really gross." Um, So yeah, and this has been a really like suddenly busy week because so I didn't last week I did all my work for this week so that I would get caught up and I could hang out with Jenny and Max all weekend, but it meant that I didn't like do any additional work over the weekend. So I'm sort of playing catch up in all my classes, and I am also last Friday I had this meeting with the people who are funding me, and it sort of is resulting in a big change in my research. And so having all these meetings with people to figure out what that means, and so it's been a busy week. Um, and my so in one of my classes, it's called Modeling and Assessment for Policy, and we are one of the things we have to do. We're divided into groups, and we have to do a case study. And my group's case study is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And I'm super lucky because my friend Shoshi worked on that in the White House. And so I just called her and got her to like basically tell me everything I needed to know and give me all the resources. So I have a lot of work to do on that this week, but fortunately I saved a lot of the research because Shoshi was able to tell me everything I needed to know. Um, yeah. I was also um, student council elections are next week, and the way they do it here is that um, your class nominates people to run, and I was nominated to run. I don't know who nominated me, but I was nominated to run for president and for secretary, which was a little bit of an ego boost. It was nice to know that people, kind of think of me in that way. And also nice because there were lots of other people who were nominated, or enough other people that I could have the satisfaction of knowing that I was nominated, but then withdraw my name because I don't think I'm really interested in student council at this point in my life, and I don't think I really have the time to do that. But it was nice to be nominated, I guess. Yeah, and so tomorrow is the first day of the open house for next year's class, and it's really hard to believe that it's already um, like they've already admitted next year's class, and it's the open house, and people are at that point already because it doesn't seem like all that long ago that I was whining about having to make my own decision, and now I'm trying to convince other people to come and make that same decision. So it should be interesting. One of the girls that I used to work with, actually, now she works for URS, which is one of Dewberry's competitors, but we worked on a lot of the same contracts together. She got in, so I'm sort of excited to see her and talk about it and have another person who's doing the same kind of work. Um, so yeah, and I have so tomorrow night is it's like so the week before the concert we have Thursday night rehearsals in addition to our regular Monday rehearsals, and then Saturday morning we have a rehearsal, and then the concert is Saturday night. My last concert I had a bunch of people come, which was great. This time around I don't think as many people are going to come because it's St. Patrick's Day this weekend. So everybody will have better things to do. Um, oh, it was fun. Oh, and by the way, I think I told you that Max and I picked out each other's clothes for when we hung out on Saturday night, and this is the t-shirt he picked out for me. Um, so I kind of like it. So, but I like weirder things than he does. I don't think well, I hope he wears, I picked out yellow corduroys for him, and I thought they looked great on him. And so I hope he wears them again. He swears he won't. But I actually really like this t-shirt, so that's well. Um, so yeah, not all that much more has happened. Although I kind of snapped at this guy Juan, who you may have met at my going away party. He's the one who was supposed to take over my job for me when I left Dewberry, and I think he's pretty good, but he's not really one of those people who like stays on top of schedules and is like self-motivated to make sure that everything gets done when it needs to. He kind of like waits for other people to tell him when there's a deadline, which is fine. There's a lot of people who work that way, but it frustrates me because that's not really the way I work. Um, and I, so a couple weeks ago, I kind of got into it with him um, one of my old projects was working on flood damage resistant materials. So one of the projects it continues to be developing a technical standard for evaluating whether materials are considered to be flood damage resistant or not. And then there's another project related to developing and evaluating contaminated floodwaters. So the uh, so as part of all of that, like the standard is through this other organization called ASTM. That's the organization that Uncle Rob is also involved in. It used to stand for the American Society of Testing and Manufacturing, but now it's ASTM International. And since they want it to be, an international organization, they can't really call it American. So it's just ASTM, and it doesn't really stand for anything anymore, which is kind of weird. Anyway, so they have these like technical meetings every 6 months, and they have all of these symposia. And there's this one symposium called Water Intrusion in Exterior Building Walls. Like there are enough people working on that topic to warrant an entire symposium, which is kind of funny. But our projects fit perfectly into that because that's what it's all about is, water and building walls and all of that. Um, so before I left, I mean, this symposium has been in the works for like a year and a half. And before I left, I submitted an abstract for it. And it was accepted. Great, fine, whatever. And we needed to submit a conference paper for it. And the paper would be published, which is cool, like published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. It's really cool. And I didn't get around to writing it before I left, which wasn't really a big problem since I left in July and the paper wasn't due until this March. But it was one of the things then that Juan needed to take over and do. And I've been in touch with him throughout the year about, the standard and about the contaminated floodwaters. I've been involved in some of that stuff. And I kept asking him about the paper and kept saying, yay, I'll write it. And I kept saying, I can write it if you tell me that you want me to write it, I'll write it. And he kept saying, no, my performance review says that I have to write this paper, so I'm going to write it. And he basically was like, if you write it, then you have to provide me with another opportunity to be published because it's on my performance review that I need to be published this year. So I was like, okay, fine, write it. Like, I don't really have time to do it, so that's fine. And I asked him about it, and when I was home in this November, yeah, it must have been November, I asked him about it. And he was like, yeah, I'm writing it. And then in December, when I was in the office, I asked him about it, and I was like, we really need to submit something. The deadline is coming up, and it is. I had even gotten a call from the guy who was chairing the symposium, and he had said, yeah, the deadline is March 1st, but since you would be a first-time author, we're putting it through double peer review, so we, like, any extra time you can give us would be greatly appreciated, and we want to make sure it's all published on time, whatever. So, and, it's a 20 or 25 page conference paper. It's not like an insignificant effort. So in December, I was figuring out where I was going to be for January and working on getting to New York and everything. And I was at Dewberry all the time because they had won a contract to do damage inspections in New Jersey. And it was Christmas week and they were really short-staffed and they needed help setting up the trainings and everything. So I was in the office helping them with that. And I said to Juan, I really need to get this paper done. And he said, well, I'm going to be deployed in New Jersey, so I'll work on it. He was like, I'll try to do it before I go to New Jersey, and if not, I'll let you know that you need to do it. And I was like, well, I'm figuring out my own deployments, so if you're not going to be able to do it, I need to know sooner rather than later so that I can factor that into my own plans. He's like, yeah. But I didn't hear about anything for a long time. And then a couple weeks ago, he sent me an email with an attachment, and he said, here's a draft paper. It was due 1 week from the email that he had sent me. I was the first person to see it, and it needed to go through like multiple other reviews. Like the URS team needed to see it, FEMA needed to see it, and our boss needed to see it before it got submitted, which meant that and 1 week is not enough time. Usually, like when we submit something to FEMA, we give them 2 weeks to review it. So already, he's he's too short of a period of time for review. And basically, what he said to me was, "I need you to review this 20-page paper pretty much immediately and get it back to me." So I was really annoyed, and because it was a pretty busy week for me, and it meant that I needed to completely put my entire life on hold to deal with something that we'd known about for 8 months. Like, there was no reason for it to have been a time crisis, but now it was. And so I opened it up, and it was the title of the paper, and the authors he listed were himself and the FEMA client, and nobody else. And the entire paper, I would say 90% of it was copied and pasted from documents I had written, word for word, just copied from documents that I had written. And the other 10%, he'd tried to change the wording a little bit to make it sound like somebody else had written it. But he's not a native English speaker, and he's not a good writer, and so the sentences were gibberish. And the documents of mine that he had copied and pasted were things like the research plan and the project proposal and conference papers that I wrote a year ago, so they didn't reflect the most recent things that had happened. And so not only had he plagiarized my work, but he was, like, his tenses were all over the place. He was talking about things in the future tense that have already happened. He was talking about things that are no longer correct. It was just a mess. I was really upset, and it took me probably twice as long as it should have taken me to review it because I had to stop every 20 minutes to contain my rage. And I kept calling people at Dewberry to vent about it, and fortunately everybody was in meetings all day the day I was reviewing it, and so nobody picked up, which is a good thing because I probably would have said some things that I shouldn't have said. And by the time I was able to talk to his boss / my former boss, I had calmed down a little bit and was a little bit more deliberate about what I said. But I had said, when I reviewed the document, I marked it up. I'm very careful, having received a lot of comments on documents from other people that were really snarky and not useful. Things like, there's this one lady who once reviewed a document, and she wrote something on it that said, she just circled the whole page and wrote, "Oh dear," at the top of the page, which is not a helpful comment. Like, I don't know what that means. Clearly she wasn't happy with something, but anyway, so I try to make my comments useful, and I try not to just say, this doesn't sound right. I try to say, this doesn't sound right. How about this? And so anyway, it was a significant effort. I did my best, so I said to him, outlined what my general concerns were, the things about talking about things that have already happened in the future tense, representing things that weren't correct, it being clear that it was, compiled from a bunch of different documents. And I also said, I said, it looks like you took most of this from stuff that I've written. That's fine, but I'd like to be listed as an author, because he hadn't even cited me. Like, he hadn't even cited the documents that he took that stuff from. So I said, I would like to be listed as an author if you're going to use my work. Um, so to his credit, he called me the next business day. I think I sent it to him on a Friday, so he called me on Monday. He had clearly worked on it over the weekend, and he called me to apologize, and he wound up listing my name first on the paper, which was good. And then was able to submit it on time and everything. But it was a mess. I was really upset about it. So then today, I got an email from him about the dirty water, the contaminated floodwaters project. The period of performance ends in a couple weeks. It's whatever, a 15-month performance period, and it ends in a few weeks. And there were 7 tasks, and they weren't like to accomplish in the project. And there were a few of them were the big tasks, like the one where we were, dunking full scale wall assemblies into vats of water. Um, and there are a few like smaller tasks. So he sent me an email, and he said, "Can you do tasks 5 and 7 by Monday?" And I called him and I was like, I really do not like this trend of like you asking me to do things with less than a week's notice. And he got all defensive about it. Anyway, I'm ranting. This is probably not interesting at all. I'm ranting about work stuff, but it's very frustrating. It seems like it's the same problem over and over and over about that people they're not on top of their own schedules, and then it becomes my problem. Um, so the problem, I would be sad not to be involved in these things anymore, because I put a lot of effort into them and I want them to go well. Um, but I'm working on trying to intern at FEMA this summer, which would be really cool. And if I do that, I would have to like make a clean break from Dewberry, because you can't like work for FEMA and also work for a FEMA contractor at the same time. So that might be a good thing. Um, Even though it would be kind of sad to lose the association with Dewberry. Um, anyway, okay, I'm gonna stop boring you with these ridiculous work stories. And if Mom and Abba are in the room, or one of you is in the room, I whined about the plagiarism thing a lot to you. So sorry you had to hear that again. Um, so I'm happy. I'm all like worked up now. So to calm my own self down, um, I thought um, we could do another set of poems from that did not make it into your calendar. I'm not sure they'll be. Well, none of them are as long as that Whitman poem that I read in the last video. Um, and they probably won't be quite as coordinated as those either. That worked out nicely that we had, links from one to the next. But I'll do my best. So these are short. Um, and this book, this is called 100 Essential American Poems. Mom found this book and I love it. So it's very helpful because it tells you which poems to compare, like how to, compare and contrast poems within the book to get a good sense. So I found this poem by Stephen Crane, which I really liked. It wasn't really appropriate for the calendar, but I really liked it. But before I read it, I'm going to read another Whitman poem. This one is short, I promise. It's really short. um, because the book says that we should compare and contrast these two poems. So, this is Walt Whitman, and it's called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became sick, tired, and sick, till rising and gliding out I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. So I know that is supposed to be, a commentary on how you don't need all the numbers and figures to appreciate the majesty of the universe, but I can't help but relate to being tired and sick sitting in a long and boring lecture. Okay, so then the poem that I had found is by Stephen Crane. Um, and so the book says Stephen Crane might reasonably be called the anti-Whitman. Instead of rolling biblical addresses to himself, humanity, and the world at large, Crane offers epigrammatic, I don't know what that would be, epigrammatic, ironic examples of the human propensity for self-delusion in verses that are virtually Greek prose poems. His cool, detached amusement, barely masking a fundamental despair. He is perhaps the first 20th century American poet. Sadly, this gifted writer died at the dawn of that century, leaving behind arguably the greatest war novel ever written, The Red Bag of Birds, along with these and other similar poem-like poems. And it's interesting to contrast this poem with When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. So, Stephen Crane, a man said to the universe. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." "However," replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation." I like that. I think it's funny and snarky. Depressing, but funny. Um, okay. So I was noticing today, my poem yesterday, I said that that Anne Bradstreet poem didn't make it into the calendar because we only did one poet, like one poem per poet. But I was wrong about that because there's two Dickinson poems in your calendar. Anyway, okay, this is another one. Um, one is a little longer than the last one, but again, not nearly as long as the Whitman poem I subjected you to. But I actually am grateful for this opportunity to read to the camera because I like if I'm reading a really long poem myself, I sometimes don't pay attention to all of it. So it's good to pay attention to it. And I really, really liked that Whitman poem. Okay, so this is Marianne Moore, who lived with her mother most of her life and never married. She was an early admirer. So she was born 1887 and died 1972. She was an early admirer and acquaintance of such modern poets as Ezra Pound, Wallace Stevens, and William Carlos Williams. She said of her work that in looking at some apparently small object, one feels the swirl of great events. Like Stevens and Williams, Moore undeniably sought out powerful images that communicate directly from poet to reader without the necessity of logical thought. At the same time, she was fascinated by natural phenomena and wrote some of her most notable poems about animals. She was famously a baseball fan and rooted for and wrote poems about the Brooklyn Dodgers. Becoming something of a legendary and eccentric figure in her old age, she was asked by the Ford Motor Company to help them name a new car. They rejected all her suggestions and named it the Edsel. There you go. Okay, so this is Marianne Moore, and the poem is called Poetry. I too dislike it. There are things that are important beyond all this fiddle. Reading it, however, with a perfect contempt for it, one discovers in it, after all, a place for the genuine. Hands that can grasp, eyes that can dilate, hair that can rise, if it must. These things are important not because a high-sounding interpretation can be put upon them, but because they are useful. When they become so derivative as to become unintelligible, the same thing may be said for all of us, that we do not admire what we cannot understand. The bat holding on upside down or in quest of something to eat, elephants pushing, a wild horse taking a roll, a tireless wolf under a tree, the immovable critic twitching his skin like a horse that feels a flea, the baseball fan dissatisfaction. Nor is it valid to discriminate against business documents or school books. All these phenomena are important. One must make a distinction, however. When dragged into prominence by half poets, the result is not poetry, nor till poets among us can be literalists of the imagination, above insolence and triviality, and can present imaginary gardens with real toads in them, shall we have it. In the meantime, if you demand on the one hand the raw material of poetry in all its rawness, and that which is on the other hand genuine, you are considered poet. Profound. Kind of interesting. A little strange, but interesting. So you can kind of see why all of these didn't quite make it into the calendar because they were good poems, but like maybe not to look at all month. Okay, so then the last one I will read for tonight is Ralph Waldo Emerson. Um, and this one is called Fable. The mountain and the squirrel had a quarrel, and the former called the latter Little Prig. Fun replied, "You are doubtless very big, but all sorts of things and weather must be taken in together to make up a year, and I think it's no disgrace to occupy my place. If I'm not so large as you are not so small as I, and not half so spry. I'll not deny you make a very pretty squirrel track. Talents differ, all is well and wisely put. If I cannot carry forests on my back, neither can you track a nut. Neither can you crack a nut." I ruined the punchline. Sorry. So those are poems. Just so you think I'm not like reading poetry all the time, that I'm using my mind for artistic pursuits. The other thing I have on my bed is this In Touch magazine that Jenny left for me because she'd read it on the airplane and she left it behind. It was one of those things where she was like, "Would you read this if I left it?" I was like, "No, yes, I will read that." So, but it's fun. It has this. I like this. This is a pretty dress Taylor Swift is wearing. You probably can't really see the picture. Anyway, I like it. All right. Well, so I have been talking for a long time. I'm sorry I didn't have anything like interesting to show you or interject, and you've just been stuck with my voice. So I will let you go. This is the fourth video, so I'm going to add in the fourth movement of the Hindemith Metamorphosis. Um, so next video we'll start on another piece. All right. I love you guys, and I will see you very soon. I booked my flight today. I'll be home next Friday, so I will see you soon. Bye.